What advice would you give somebody who is got a great idea on the science, maybe that's heavy science based, for example, and they kind of wanted to follow your path and maybe, I don't know, maybe they're not starting from scratch, but like what operational stuff might you?
I think that, in software, you can scale quickly and you can get to an exit quickly. When
Mhm.
you're making things, it's the get rich slow process. It's not get rich fast. It takes, I've done this a few times, it takes 7 years to get to an exit. It's not 1 year, it's not 2 years, it's 7 years.
Welcome to the Systems Edge. This is a podcast where we talk about operations, sometimes operational excellence, and sometimes we get into the weeds a little bit. We talk about things that have not worked so well. And so it's just a conversation where hopefully we can share some insight and some conversations that typically maybe happen behind closed doors. And today, my guest is George Boyajian. Got that right, I hope, from Muscle Polymers. Welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here today, George.
Thank you, David. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to chatting with you too. You guys have some interesting technology, and I want to hear all about it. But before we do that, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your role, and jump right into maybe your business and what you guys do.
Sure. So I was trained as an academic. I'm a geologist, evolutionary biologist by training. I was a professor at Penn for a while. In 1995, I left academia. And since then, in various roles, I've been starting companies with a couple of successful exits, a couple of things that had to get closed, and learned a lot along the way. My passion is trying to figure out how to get stuff out of the academy more efficiently, where it can help society. That's really where all this comes from. And we've done that a few times in the past. And we started this company about 6 years ago. And the way we got here is my business partner said, let's start a company. I said, yeah, that sounds good. And he wanted to start a pharmaceutical company. And I said, I have no interest in early stage molecules. I don't get the value proposition, how you exit. And when I watched pharmaceutical execs running startups, all they were doing was going to lunch and drinking expensive wine. And that didn't seem the most efficient use of capital. So I said, let's go find something else. And I came up with 10 criteria the technology had to fit. And we used those 10 criteria, things like, does the product fill an unmet need? Will it have high margins? Does the business scale? Do we know the exit before we start? We had a whole bunch of these. Is the professor insane? Because you want insane professors blow up companies, as we've experienced in the past. And we started looking at 800 different technologies at major research universities. Of those, 40 met our initial criteria. We optioned 12 of those, and we spent 18 months de-risking them. And we chose this one to start the company, this catechol polymer out of Purdue University. And the story there goes, there was a professor at Purdue University named Jonathan Wilker, and he received $10 million over the course of 12 years from the Office of Naval Research to develop an underwater adhesive. And the key problem that ONR was interested in solving is the fact that submarines have thick panels that go on the outside of them that defeat sonar. These get glued on to the outside of subs. And it's not a secret, these things fall off. And, it's a problem for all the navies of the world. In fact, there was an article a few years back in Popular Mechanics about this problem. And what John Wilker did was he looked at a whole range of marine organisms, and he found those that made adhesives that worked underwater, and he concentrated on the mussel. And the mussel sticks out its little foot, and it secretes an adhesive that cures instantly underwater. And it uses that same adhesive to draw back the byssal thread to its shell. He looked at that molecule, the mussel foot protein, which is a very large protein, and he found the specific region that caused it to adhere. And then he made a synthetic version of that molecule. And when he was making it, he's a professor, he's just trying to make one off. He was making it for $1 million a kilo. He wasn't making a kilo at a time. He was making couple grams at a time. And when we looked at it, we figured we could make it at larger volumes at a much lower cost with a different method of making. We dug deep into the markets, and we saw that there was an opportunity for related molecules. This is a catechol polymer, and I'll get into that in a minute. But we licensed it. We have all the exclusive rights for all uses throughout the world for this molecule. We figured out how to make it at scale at the right price. And, we've based a company on that. So we work with the US Navy, but underwater adhesives, we can add this into things. We make an underwater paint, an underwater coating. We can actually paint things underwater. It
Wow.
makes a very good, it adheres through blood. So it has a potential to be an adhesive for inside the human body, or a sealant for inside the human body, or a hemostatic agent, stop bleeding inside the human body or mammalian bodies. It makes a very good coating for implants. It causes osteoblasts, or osteoblasts proliferate 5 times faster on these materials, which means bone grows faster. It has 95% less cell death. There are a lot of interesting attributes of this molecule. It's a polymer. And if you think of things like Teflon and Gore-Tex are polymers that change the world. And they only come along once every generation. And that's what this polymer has, that kind of potential.
That's very impressive. We could probably spend a couple hours and you could probably get in deep into the weeds on the science on something like that. I find those fascinating. I've always been a fan of, I kind of put it in the category of gadgets. I know it goes way beyond that because you're solving such big problems. But operationally speaking, what's a typical day look like for you in light of your responsibilities to manage what you're managing and doing what you're doing there?
So over the last few years, it's been a desert out there to raise financing. Been very difficult. So I spent a lot of my time financing. In the last 6 months, there have been some exits out there. High net worth individuals, angels, family offices, they've begun to invest again. So that's been good. We're about to receive a significant contract from DoD. So we've been working on that, and then managing that contract over the next 2 years, my team will be doing. And then where I spend my time, besides raising finance, and is developing the priorities for the company, and managing the team. So the priorities now, we have a dental product we'll bring to market this coming year. I want to make sure that stays on time. It cures dentin hypersensitivity. So if you use Sensodyne, we have a product that will be a permanent cure, so you never have to use Sensodyne again, which is a real breakthrough. Dentists don't have anything like that. We have a product called SeaTac, which is an underwater adhesive for swimming pools, boats, and coral reefs, and it's being used for coral reef restoration throughout the world. So I want to get those products to market and get them build up sales in those areas. And then we're evaluating half a dozen other projects that we'll do this year, whether it be cosmetics or biomedical, and then putting the teams in place and the partnerships in place to get those moving. So that's really where I spend my time.
I can imagine trying to figure out and decide where priority, right? I mean, you're just so many verticals, so many verticals you could go into and go deep into. And I'm sure they all have their own set of regulation and everything else. And
Yeah, I mean, the FDA is so, you learn. I've started a bunch of companies, and you always learn something new when you go to a new company. And the thing I learned, there were 2 things that were surprises to me. First surprise was we can make a lot of versions of our product very quickly. If you want a prototype, I can give you 30 or 40 different formulations in a matter of a few hours to go test. So that was really remarkable that we can do that. The other surprise, which wasn't as good, was the qualification time in different industries. For the military, it may take 5 or 6 or 7 years to get a product approved for use. For eyelash adhesive, you may figure it out in a couple of months. So we have coatings that we're working with companies in the aerospace industry, for instance, where it's there's tens of thousands of hours of testing that has to go on or thousands of hours of testing before the material can be deployed. So you may finish the product and have to wait 5 years before it's deployed, or 7 years before it's deployed. So that's been a little bit of a surprise. So yes, trying to make sure that you've got a pipeline of products that will generate revenue so you can get to the longer range, the longer timeline products like biomedical products, managing that portfolio, managing those cash flows, managing the creation of the value in the company, and keeping that going is That's always a balancing act.
Right. Are you producing this now, or are you and are you if so, are you doing it in-house or you're third partying it and just we're focusing on the licensing side?
Yeah, so we manufacture at the kilogram scale now. That
Mhm.
doesn't sound like a lot, but some of our applications require only 1/10 of 1% loading of our material. So a little bit goes a long way. So we make 1 kilo of material for some things. That's 1,000 liters of final product. So that works. Interestingly, our material can be made using standard equipment. So we've had tollers approach us, and our margins are very good, so we can afford tolling. So we could go with a third party if we needed to scale up quickly, but working with DoD, and they're expected to man. We're in a program that will likely support where the DoD contracts us to build a plant to supply the DoD. But like I said, scaling is not an issue. Within 18 months, 12 to 18 months, we can be at, the ton scale, which is plenty
It's
for most
impressive.
applications.
Yeah, and for our listeners, DoD meaning Department of Defense. So walk us through the life cycle from the first time you touch your product to going out the door. What does that look like for you guys on the operational side?
Well, is first you touch the product and you get a couple grams from the professor, and then you work on it for about 2 months, and then you shut down your labs for 9 months because of COVID. So, that's the
That's
process.
the
And then
process, at least that
that's
was
the
this
process,
last few
and then
years. Yeah.
and you don't have a lot of it, and you haven't made enough of it, so you figure out that you can actually use it as a thin coat because necessity is the mother of invention. We figured out we can use it as a primer instead of a bulk adhesive because we only
Hmm.
have a few grams, and we dilute it, and it turns out to be a very valuable product as a thin coat, talking about, hundreds of nanometers maybe. You figure out the uses, and then you figure out how to manufacture at scale. You eliminate, I think it's 8 or 9 different steps. Some of them were at minus 20 C. And then we figured out how to make it in 3 steps at room temperature. So we really dropped the cost of the product. And then in our research on the material, there's this thing called catechol polymers, which, if you want to get into the weeds, it's a hydroxyl group with it's a benzene ring with 2 hydroxyl groups sticking off it. And what that means is those hydroxyl groups oxidize and reduce. I know I'm getting a little bit chemical here, but that's the magic sauce here. And that allows this material to bind 8 different ways. Most materials only bind one way or 2 ways. Our material binds 8 different ways, and that's what makes it such an amazing polymer. It'll bind to pretty much everything, and that's what makes it special. And then you have to figure out all the uses for it. And there was another molecule called polydopamine. The name's not particularly important. It's a catechol polymer, and it turned out to be all the rage in the early 2000s. And the people that studied it found they published over 100,000 articles on polydopamine, and they had 4,000 patents on polydopamine. Not a single one of those patents ever became a product. And that's because polydopamine, you have to make and use immediately. You can't store it, you can't make it at scale. But the chemistry is very valuable. So every major corporation in the world patented around polydopamine. GE, LG, Halliburton, Airbus. They all had, patents from better binding agents for anodes to coatings on aircraft, things like that. And when we realized that all of these patents could use our material, that was a great opportunity for us. I mean, when they invented Teflon and when they invented Gore-Tex, they didn't know what to do with those things. Um, but they were invented by accident. We invented our material, and we knew 4,000 uses on day one, which makes it interesting. So then what you do is you sort through those 4,000 uses and you prioritize them, which ones you're going to go after and why. And then you find partners to work with you to develop them, test them, and bring them to market. And that's sort of how we operate.
I can tell you're a scientist at heart. You are definitely a scientist at heart. One of my best friends is
Some
also
days that's a good thing. Yeah.
yeah, one of my best friends is a product developer for the nutraceutical industry, and when we go to dinner, this is what it sounds like. It's like, and just the science, just so in love with the science. Because this is operational, though, and in terms of on the practical side, how do you track all that? Like practically speaking, how do you?
That's a good backing up to, how do we evaluate it first and then how do we track it? Right. So we built a custom AI system using a chemistry large language model, and some AI, and to evaluate these 4,000 patents. So we loaded the 100,000 papers and 4,000 patents into our own system app, in the Amazon cloud or wherever it was. And then with this system, we were able to query it in some very clever ways, to figure out how to use the material, what companies might want to partner with us, uh, how we can manipulate the molecule. There are a lot of things we could do with it. And that really helped us sort through those 4,000 uses. So we started with a large language model, around chemistry and patents, and use that for our initial evaluation.
It sounds like
And
you also included a CRM into that. You said, did you
yeah,
put
yeah, we didn't.
tracking people that could use it? Yeah.
Yeah, we used Salesforce initially. We need a new CRM that'll be set up behind the DoD security system. I have to look into what CRM that will be. Working with DoD, there's a certain level, it's CMCC. We're at level 1, moving to level 2, and there's only a certain set of softwares that are approved to be used behind that wall. And so that is that prescribes a lot of what we prefer to use. So we need a CRM now that works behind that wall. And then, we did it with spreadsheets and a lot of meetings, and we kept whittling it down, till we had, a few dozen things. And then we track it on spreadsheets. And like I said, we were using Salesforce initially. And then once we got it down to, half a dozen different products, we could just do that. No automated sense. But
Everything starts in spreadsheets. So
yeah, it does. It works. It doesn't work great. One of the challenges we'd like to do is capture all our knowledge. We do a lot through email, obviously, and there's a lot of technical information that ends up residing in email, and we're trying to capture that. So we need an AI agent behind our wall. The only one that's approved is Copilot. So we'll use that. It'd be nice if some other ones were, I'm a big fan of Gemini. We use that for, I used to, early in my career, I used to get paid to write business plans. And over 6 to 12 weeks, I'd write a business plan. I'd get paid $50,000 to do that. Now I can write a better business plan in an afternoon,
yeah,
using Gemini. It's stunning how good it is.
it's almost like what you're doing now. AI is almost a requirement. I don't know if that's if
Absolutely.
at
Absolutely. I
least to
mean,
do it the level you're doing it. Yeah.
if you're not using it, um, I grew up, early in my career, PCs, were new. Not everybody had a PC, and it was like, okay, I don't need to do that on the mainframe. I can do that on a PC. Or I don't need to do that on the slide rule. I can do that on a calculator. That's how old I am. And
Hmm.
then it went to PCs, and then it went to, I can find this on the internet. I don't have to go to the reference library. And I'm trying to adopt even faster AI because it's so powerful. Again, you have to know how to use it. It's not hallucinating half as much as it did, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even a year ago it was hallucinating. Now it's remarkably good. The queries have gotten much better. The prompts it gives you are fantastic. And yeah, if you're not using it, you're behind. We use it to suggest areas of research in chemistry, lines of, this is our problem, what can we solve it with? And it's just been growing by leaps and bounds out there in the chemical world. And so, yeah, I mean, you need it. We just cover a lot more ground and get a lot more solutions potentially to test.
You
We'll
mentioned
need, yeah. Go
you
ahead, I'm sorry.
said you use Salesforce. You built this custom AI thing. What other business systems are you guys using? You mentioned spreadsheets. What other? Like, how do you manage cash flow? Are you just a simple accounting system?
Yeah, simple accounting system. I forget which one we're using, but yeah, we're still a small company.
Yeah. How many team members?
10 full-time employees.
Okay.
We'll probably grow to 20 this year. We just made 2 offers. So we'll grow and we'll put in some systems. Yeah, this is the time. Like I said, I've started several companies. This is the time, in this going from 10 to 20, going from R&D to operations, sales. This is the time you put systems into place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we're doing right now, is beginning to put those systems into place. And this new layer of the DoD security is not something any of us have dealt with before. And that adds a certain level of a certain constraint to your selection process.
Yeah, being in software development, and actually we've chased some of the DoD work. It's like SOC 2 compliance is one of the big factors, and it's not just on the back end with servers. It's your software, like you said. There's all these boxes you got to check, and there's all these audit processes for that too. Obviously,
Yeah,
especially
we self audit this year, and next year we have to have an
yeah,
independent audit.
yep,
So we have dual authentication for our just to log into the computer. I have to use my phone to log into my computer. We're going to have to change our facility here shortly as security goes up. We have to control access better. We're in an incubator. We're going to have to move some of our operations out of this facility just to maintain
yep,
security going
yep,
forward. So there are a lot of. I mean, it's interesting.
yeah,
It throttles you. It's a tax you're paying
yeah, yeah. It is.
to work in that environment.
And people joke about the Department of Defense, $10,000 for a stapler, but they don't understand sometimes that, you know, the requirements behind the scenes to make that stapler and all the hoops people have to jump through. Red tape's real, and sometimes there's meaning behind it that's valid. So in general, though, your business systems, you've run businesses before, and you kind of understand they all, the less disconnected they are, the better in general. If you can get all these siloed pieces of information to come together and where they're more automated, whether it's HR, scheduling, accounting, and that sort of thing, what type of reports have you relied on in the past, and what type of reports do you rely on now, and do you think you'll rely on in the future?
I always like to, every week I know our cash position,
Hmm.
and our burn and our forecast and how we're doing relative to that. And that'll get a lot more formal now with the program.
Hmm.
We'll have to set up a debt instrument or credit instrument here shortly, because of you do the work and then you get paid from the DoD. So I'd rather not float that out of our equity. That's the primary bit. It's constant communication when you're doing R&D. So we're scrumming every day. I don't like that word too much, but we're just talking to each other all the time. When you're doing research and development, a lot of that's captured in the lab notebooks, and we're not electronic on our lab notebooks. We're still old school on that. We've looked into them. We've seen nothing that really grabs us. There's some safety software we're probably going to implement
Hmm.
that we'll put into place. But when you're an R&D organization in a small company, maybe I shouldn't be on your show. I don't know, but we don't need a lot of software.
No.
There's still pencil and paper. Now that we're going forward and we're doing designs for plants, we're scaling up production. We're using a lot more engineering software. Or consultants are using engineering software. We'll have project management software. We're bringing in a project manager for this. They will choose what they implement, and that'll be based on what DoD permits us to use. So again, we don't have a lot of choices to make in this company because of the constraints imposed by DoD. But even then, early stage companies, we're not software. We're not turning the crank. We generate value through adding IP and proving out applications. Sales are wonderful. Believe me, I like sales as much as the next guy, but that's not where our shareholders are going to get the return. Our
Mm.
shareholders are going to get the return after we sell one and somebody says, I'm buying the company, they got that. So we make an underwater paint. Once that's approved in commercial, you can imagine the applications for that. You paint bridges, paint boats. You don't have to do dry dock with them. There is no approved adhesive for inside the human body. So if we have an adhesive for inside the human body, J&J or Boston Scientific or somebody like that is going to come by and say, we can sell the crap out of that. So ours is a slightly different model.
Yeah,
We
you're
have to,
licensing IP at the end of the day primarily,
yeah,
and then they're going to want to control they have their own standards to control the end product and use their own facilities and resources for that, I assume, right? Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Correct.
We'll
Correct.
license manufacturing. Ours is a relatively simple manufacturing process. There'll be a lot of software that's controlling the plant. we'll have those systems in.
Yeah, I do sense a custom ARP system is coming in your future. It's going to have to be because DoD is going to require it, and you got a lot of software you've discussed. It's just that you're going to have to pull it all under a system that meets all these standards combined, whatever that ends up being. So yeah, it's going to have to be custom. And I think it just in general, what you're describing, there's no going to be, it's not like there's an off the shelf for what you're doing.
Right. But I think we do need a sales software. If we could get Salesforce or something equivalent set up behind the wall, that would be great. We literally have hundreds of inquiries that we've worked with companies, sent out samples to them, and we need to track that. I need a head of business development to put that into place. And then, brand managers, like for our CTAC line of products, we're needing a brand manager, and they'll run that as a standalone business, and they will be pursuing all their leads on their own, and they'll need to track all that. And that's a pure marketing and sales program just for that product. So we'll need to put that into place. We haven't needed it yet, but we're going to need it now.
What's keeping you awake at 2 in the morning? I might have asked you this the other day when we chatted briefly yesterday, but
But besides one cat,
a cat.
yeah, a cat that comes in occasionally. No, I feel pretty good. I sleep pretty well. My biggest concerns, things that, and if you can't control it, it's not too much of a concern. Will the FDA view our application the way we want it to be viewed? Things like that. We were delayed, we were doged, um, and our program was cut out with DoD, and then it was reinstated by Congress,
Hmm.
and the contracting office got cut by 60%. So contracts got developed more slowly. So, will DOD move this contract in 2 weeks, or will they move it in 6 weeks, or they move it in 3 months? Or will something change and they'll shut down the program again? Those are things that, we have to be nimble enough to deal with. So, and then, will they evaluate this product quickly enough? Will DoD surprise here's a cat that keeps me up at night. Will the DoD surprise us with another product attribute that it needs?
Mm-hmm.
Those are things will we get, I don't worry about software too much. Those things are out there. We'll find something. My team will put something together. We'll bring in a consultant that'll help us. Those are all problems people have solved before. The things that keep me up at night are things that are out of and then I have to make adjustments on the move. I worry about my team, making sure that they're used to their full capacity. But as we pivot, I want to make sure they're fully employed,
What
fully
advice
utilized.
what advice would you give somebody who is got a great idea on the science, maybe that's heavy science based, for example, and they kind of wanted to follow your path and maybe I don't know, maybe they're not starting from scratch, but like what operational stuff might you tell them to do? Because it sounds like you're being very patient with this process. It sounds like maybe you're being forced to be patient, but
I think that, in software, you can scale quickly and you can get to an exit quickly. When
Mhm.
you're making things, it's the get rich slow process. It's not get rich fast. I've done this a few times. It takes 7 years to get to an exit. It's not 1 year. It's not 2 years. It's 7 years. And you have to make stuff. You have to make it at scale. You have to qualify it. Then you have to sell it. And that takes years to do when you're making things. And most entrepreneurs, when I talk to them, the question I ask them first is, they'll start telling me about their technology, and they'll start talking to me about the product and what it can do and this and that. And I say, okay, I don't need to know that. I'll give you everything you say is true. In fact, it's 20%, 30% better than you think it is. All right. You will get there. You'll have all the resources to get there. Right. Who's going to buy it and how much are they going to pay? Right. Most of them don't get that far. They'll say, this is my first customer. That's nice. You need, you know, 10,000 customers, 20,000 customers every year. You got one. And they never do Before you write a business plan, before you start spending money, the first thing you should spend money on is a marketing study, that says, are there people that are willing to pay X amount of dollars for this? And how much are they willing to pay? And if you can't answer that question, you probably shouldn't be starting your business, no matter how cool the technology is. Most of the time I talk to entrepreneurs, I tell them, pick another business. And I know that sounds harsh, but remember, 90% of businesses fail, and they don't fail for lack of capital. And they don't fail because people don't work hard. And they don't fail because they can't make a product. They fail because they don't make a business. And that's the challenge here. If somebody told you we're all going to invest money and we're going to lose 90% of the time, right? No, everybody would say that is a failed system. Oh, we should change the system. You're doing it wrong. With all these incubators, with all these accelerators, there's a fundamental problem in startups. But fortunately, in the US, we have an incredible amount of capital, an incredible amount of people's hands, and we're an entrepreneurial nation, and people are excited and they're willing to go for it, which is great. We're the entrepreneurial engine for the world, and it works. But only because, not because we're smart, it's because we can afford a lot of dry holes,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's what works. But this system can be more efficient. I see a lot of startups. I've done a lot of pitch events, and I look at some of these companies and I go, it will never happen. And angels put money in and VCs put money in, and the decisions they make are, quite frankly, a little stunning. We looked at 800 different technologies before we started our company. We spent 18 months de-risking the idea before we started the company. And it's still a challenge. And
Right.
so
Right.
I would argue that I don't think everybody can do that. And I don't know that it's a model for everything. And sometimes you have to take chances and you believe it and you've got a passion, and you always change your business model along the way. It's never what you started out with.
Right.
So I'd look at team and I'd do a much deeper dive at the beginning to see whether or not you will save yourself a lot of heartache and a lot of people's money if you do that every time you come up with an idea. And let me tell you, doing a online survey of customers and price points and so on, it's not expensive. For a couple few $1,000s, we surveyed 1,000 people with sensitive teeth. 1,000. We asked them 8 questions. We knew more about it than the dental industry did. They said, we talked to the dental industry, said, oh no, you'll never be able to sell it at that price. I said, how do you know? We were the only ones ever to do the study, and
Hmm.
and then when people have gone out and replicated the study and doing their due diligence on our company, they've proven, yeah, we were right. But nobody in the dental industry had ever done that study before. And who are we? We're a little startup, and we did it. So, there's
What
a
I'm
lot
hearing,
of,
what I'm hearing
yeah.
from you is because you've done this before, you're wise enough to be able to remove a lot of the emotion that a lot of startup people have, and just take it more objectively and take that raw data and accept it as opposed to like be blind to it. You know how love is blind, right? We all fall in love with our baby. I see so many entrepreneurs like that. You do too, right? This is my baby. You can't tell them it's ugly. You just can't. They will not
Well,
agree with you.
it's funny you say that. So I'm writing a book right now on the 10 criteria we used and how we implemented it.
Okay.
And the working title for that book is Your Baby is Ugly. And I may use it, but yeah, that's something I'm working on. And yeah, and
Yep.
more
Yep.
people. Look, I had to close my first company. It was one of the most painful things I ever had to do in my life. You have to call up your vendors and say, hey, I can't pay you. We're shutting down the company. This is what I got. You're talking to your employees. You're talking to everybody that you've been telling this is the greatest thing in the world. And you close down your first company. Why? I closed it down because I didn't understand the sales cycle and it took
Yep.
too long.
Yep.
Right. And I gave, and there were other reasons, some of them detailed in those 10 criteria that we use.
Yep. Yep. And with Shark Tank, America's Got Talent, those judges have a tough job. They got to tell people they're no good, that they're missing there's a hole in their plan, and they don't want to hear it. And yeah, so
And some of
it's
them can do well. And
they
retail's
can.
a
It's yep.
interesting beast. I don't
Yep.
do
Yep.
retail, so I don't watch Shark Tank because they're all pretty much retail.
Yeah. But it's human nature at the end of the day that's still at work there, right? Like,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
human nature.
Work it. And the other thing I would tell entrepreneurs is show up. Don't do things over the internet. Show up in people's offices, shake their hand, break bread with them. That's important. And things happen when you show up that just talking over cameras, so much more.
Yeah,
That's a very valuable
the human
because you'll
connection.
learn so much more.
The
People
human
will
connection, yeah, so valuable.
the human connection, and you'll see things. You'll see things when you show up at their place and you'll talk more and somebody else will pop into the room and all of a sudden something organic occurs. And that's the other thing I tell, young people to do because this is how they've learned, but it's important to show up.
I know when we go on site for software development, we go on site on purpose if we can for that reason, because we make less mistakes. We see things like you said, we're seeing, oh, wait a second, he just walked over there with that piece of paper. That could be automated. You would have never seen it otherwise. But, anyways, this has been great today. Thank you so much for taking time. We could probably talk for another hour or two on. I've got another show to do actually in about 20 minutes. But you've given us just from the heart what you guys are doing. It's very exciting. And this is going to be, I'm sure, a great show for people to just be inspired, nothing, if nothing else. It's always awesome when I talk to seasoned entrepreneurs because there's a resonance in their voice, there's a confidence, and it just comes through because you're able to say, well, I've done this, but not that. There's a level of surety in what you're saying. Like, you better listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. And that came through strong today.
Or we could be completely deluded and we continue to do that. And that's
Yeah,
why we're
yeah,
still
maybe.
entrepreneurs. That might be the other
It could
possibility. But
be, but you gotta have you may have failure, but I'm sure you've had some successes in there too,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
you can speak to that. Everybody has that. It's funny, actually, if you have success right out of the gate, that can be sometimes a bad thing because then you get delusional, right? You think everything's gonna go that way, and unfortunately, it
Maybe you're
doesn't.
just maybe you're just really smart. Who
Could
knows?
be, could be,
And there are a
could
lot of
be.
things that happen that are outside your control. 9/11 comes along, the
Yes,
meltdown comes along.
yes,
Those
yes.
things those things you learn hard lessons from those, not that you can always implement. But I tell my team and I tell my investors, they say, "What do you worry about?" I don't worry about it, but I lived through 9/11. I had a $120 million deal ready to close on September the 18th, 2001, one block from the World Trade Center. That deal didn't go through.
No,
So selling my company to GE, my last company, GE, right in the middle of the meltdown. AIG was our reinsurer, and that messed with the transaction. So there are things that happen that you just have to be adept enough to deal with, and just know when you are out of your depth. You just have to say, okay, we're packing in, and we'll hibernate for a year or two, and then we'll come back. But
there you go.
I have to think about more. We're putting in these systems unfortunately, in this company, we're so limited behind what's behind that
Yeah,
CMCC
yeah, absolutely.
wall. But we're big fans of process automation and software automation. It's absolutely necessary. In my previous companies, it was what made us, and one of them is what made us good.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely, definitely, well, you have to in these days. We kinda started off on the AI route, and that's kinda what that really is all about in the ends. But thank you again. Appreciate you being here today. This has been absolutely awesome. You pulling back the curtain for us and our listeners on your business, what you're doing, and it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and have a good day.